The Christmas party was in full swing when my father called my son a charity case. I remember the exact moment: the twinkling lights, the string quartet, the 40 guests in their expensive clothes, holding champagne glasses and pretending to care about each other. My father standing by the fireplace, holding court like a king on his throne. And Ethan, my 8-year-old son, clutching my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. "Gentlemen," my father said, his voice carrying across the room. "Allow me to introduce my grandson. This is Ethan. He's the charity case." The word hung in the air like smoke. I felt the blood drain from my face. The men behind my father exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone laughed nervously. "Charity case?" one of them repeated. My father smiled, that cold, calculated smile I'd known my entire life. "You know, special needs. The boy has autism. Claire has to spend a fortune on therapies and specialists. It's a full-time job just keeping him alive." He turned to me, his eyes flat. "Isn't that right, Claire?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, as the room seemed to spin around me. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He started to rock back and forth, his hands flapping at his sides. "Too loud," he whispered, his voice rising. "Too loud, too loud." I snapped back to reality. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Ethan's hand. My father raised an eyebrow. "Already? The party's just getting started." I didn't answer. I pulled Ethan toward the door, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers. I could feel the tears streaming down my face, but I didn't care. When we reached the car, I collapsed into the driver's seat and sobbed. Ethan sat beside me, silent, his hands still flapping. "Too loud," he said again, softer now. I reached over and took his hand. "I know, baby. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." That night, I sat in my bedroom, staring at the wall. The word echoed in my head: charity case. My father had called my son a charity case, in front of 40 people, at Christmas. And that night, I made a decision my father never thought his obedient daughter was capable of making. A decision that would cost him everything. But to understand what I did, you need to understand who I was before that night. I grew up in the shadow of Hartwell Industries. My father, Richard Hartwell, built the company from nothing. He started with a single truck and a handful of construction contracts, working 18-hour days, pouring every dollar back into the business. By the time I was born, Hartwell Industries was a regional powerhouse, with offices in 3 states and contracts worth hundreds of millions. My father was a self-made man, and he never let anyone forget it. "I built this," he'd say whenever anyone questioned him. "I can do whatever I want." My mother, Evelyn, was the gentleness in his life. She softened his edges, reminded him that there was more to life than profit margins and quarterly reports. She died when I was 12, after a long battle with breast cancer, and the softness died with her. I remember the night she passed. I was sitting in the hospital hallway, alone, because my father couldn't bear to be in the room when it happened. He was in the parking garage, pacing, making phone calls, dealing with business because that was the only way he knew how to cope. When the doctor came out and told me she was gone, I didn't cry. I just sat there, frozen, trying to understand what my life would look like without her. My father came back an hour later, his eyes red but his jaw set. He didn't hug me. He didn't say anything comforting. He just looked at me and said, "We have to be strong now, Claire. No more weakness." That was the moment I understood. In my father's world, grief was weakness. Love was weakness. The only thing that mattered was control. After my mother died, my father became harder, colder, more obsessed with the business. He worked even longer hours, demanded even more from everyone around him. He had no time for tears, no patience for vulnerability. But he also had no time for me. I was 12 years old, grieving and alone, and he left me to fend for myself. The housekeeper made sure I was fed and clothed, but no one asked how I was feeling. No one held me when I cried. No one told me it would be okay. I learned to bury my emotions, to present a calm, competent front. I learned that the only way to get my father's attention was to be useful, so I made myself useful. I got perfect grades. I joined every extracurricular. I took over the household management when the housekeeper quit. By the time I was 15, I was running the house like a small business, making sure the bills were paid, the groceries were bought, the repairs were scheduled. My father noticed. He didn't praise me. He never praised anyone. But he gave me more responsibility. He trusted me with things. That was his version of love. Then Mark was born. My brother was a surprise. My mother had been pregnant when she died, though no one knew it until it was too late to do anything about it. He was born 3 months after her death, a tiny, screaming reminder of everything we'd lost. My father didn't know what to do with him. He hired a nanny, then a series of nannies, then a full-time staff. Mark grew up in the mansion, surrounded by people but starved for attention. I tried to fill the gap. I was 15 years older, practically a mother myself. I held Mark when he cried, taught him to walk, read him bedtime stories. I loved him fiercely, even as I resented the way my father doted on him. Because my father did dote on him. Mark was the son he'd always wanted, the heir, the future, the one who would carry on the Hartwell name. He could do no wrong. Every mistake was forgiven, every failure excused. Mark will grow into it, my father would say. He just needs time. I had never been given time. I had been expected to be perfect from the moment I could walk. Here's something you need to understand about me. I'm not a saint. I've made mistakes, bad ones. I've been selfish, cruel, and reckless. I've pushed people away because I was afraid they'd leave first. I've said things I can't take back. I've hurt the people I love most. I'm not telling you this to earn your sympathy. I'm telling you because it's true. Because I want you to understand that I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just a woman who finally decided to stop being a victim. The difference between me and my father isn't that I'm good and he's evil. The difference is that I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. He never was. That's why, when I finally decided to take him down, I didn't do it out of righteous anger. I did it out of exhaustion. The exhaustion of a woman who'd spent 38 years trying to earn love that was never going to come. I joined Hartwell Industries right out of college. At 22, I started in the accounting department, the most boring job imaginable. But I was good at it. Better than good. I had a head for numbers, an eye for detail, and a work ethic that bordered on obsessive. Within 3 years, I was managing the department. Within 5, I was overseeing the company's finances. Within 10, I was effectively running the company from behind the scenes, making the decisions my father took credit for. He never praised me, not directly, but he gave me more responsibility, more access, more trust. That was his way of showing approval, not with words, but with expectation. "You can handle this," he'd say, dropping another stack of files on my desk. "Don't disappoint me." I never did. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. I missed birthdays, weddings, funerals. I sacrificed my personal life, my friendships, my health, all for the chance to hear my father say, "Good job." He never did. Instead, he gave the public praise to Mark. Mark, who'd dropped out of college after 2 years. Mark, who'd spent his 20s traveling and finding himself. Mark, who'd returned to the company at 30 with no skills, no experience, and no apparent interest in learning. But Mark had something I didn't: our father's approval. When I was 32, I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. I was in a relationship with a man named David, a kind and decent person who loved me despite my father's disapproval. David was a teacher, not a businessman, and my father never let either of us forget it. "He's beneath you," my father said. "He'll drag you down." When I told my father I was pregnant, he didn't speak to me for a month. Then he called me into his office, sat me down, and said the words that would haunt me for years. "Love makes people weak, Claire. Your mother loved too much, and it killed her. This child will do the same to you." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "People like us, we don't have the luxury of weakness. We have to be strong. We have to be in control. A child, especially a child who might be different, will destroy your focus. It will make you vulnerable. How do you know my child will be different? He shrugged. I don't. But the risk is there, and I've never been one to gamble with things that matter. I left his office in tears. But I didn't leave the company. I couldn't. I'd built my entire career there, and I was convinced that if I could just prove myself, just show him what I was capable of, he'd come around. I was wrong about that too. Ethan was born 8 months later. From the beginning, he was different. Not in a bad way, just different. He didn't like to be held. He didn't make eye contact. He seemed overwhelmed by the world around him, retreating into himself when things got too loud, or too bright, or too much. The diagnosis came when he was 4, autism spectrum disorder. David and I were devastated, not because we loved Ethan any less, but because we knew the world would be cruel to him. We knew there would be stares, whispers, judgments. We knew there would be people who saw him as broken, as less than, as a burden. My father was one of those people. He's not normal, he said, the first time he met Ethan after the diagnosis. There's something wrong with him. He's autistic, I said. It's a developmental disorder. He's still the same child. My father shook his head. I've seen kids like that. They never amount to anything. You should have, well, it doesn't matter now. I felt the words like a slap. What should I have done, Dad? Not had him? He shrugged. I'm just saying, you've made your choices. Now you have to live with them. The divorce came when Ethan was 6. It wasn't anyone's fault, really. The stress of raising a special needs child, the financial pressure, the endless appointments and therapies. It wore us down until there was nothing left to hold us together. David moved to a nearby town, and we agreed to share custody. Ethan spent weekdays with me and weekends with his father, and we both tried our best to give him the stability he needed. But here's the part I don't like to admit. I wasn't always a good mother. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and terrified. I made mistakes. I lost my temper. I said things I shouldn't have. There were nights when I'd lock myself in the bathroom and cry because I didn't know how to help my own son. I'm not proud of those moments. But they're part of my story. They're part of what made me the person I am today. I taught Ethan something when he was old enough to understand. The world will tell you you're different, I said, holding his hand as we walked through the park. But different doesn't mean less. He didn't respond. He rarely did. But I saw something flicker in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Different means you see things other people don't, I continued. It means your brain works uniquely, and unique is powerful, Ethan. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. He squeezed my hand, and that squeeze said more than words ever could. That night, after the Christmas party, after I'd put Ethan to bed and sat alone in the dark, I called Aunt Margaret. She answered on the second ring. Claire? It's late. Is everything okay? Margaret, I need your help. There was a pause. What kind of help? Legal help, and financial. I need to take control of the company. Another pause. Longer this time. Claire, are you sure? That's a big step. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I'll call my lawyer in the morning. We need to talk. Aunt Margaret was my mother's older sister and the only member of my extended family who had never been intimidated by my father. She was a retired corporate attorney who'd spent 30 years negotiating mergers and acquisitions for some of the biggest companies in the country. She was sharp, strategic, and completely unafraid of men like Richard Hartwell. She'd seen too many of them to be impressed by his bluster. We met at her condo the next morning, a sleek high-rise overlooking the river. She poured us both coffee, then sat across from me with a legal pad and a pen. Start from the beginning, she said. Tell me everything. I did. The Christmas party, the charity case comment, the years of being overlooked and undermined. I told her about my work at the company, my responsibilities, my access to financial records. I told her about Mark, the golden child who'd never had to lift a finger. I told her about Ethan, and about the words my father had spoken in front of 40 people. When I finished, Margaret's expression was grim. Your father is a bully, she said. And bullies like him only understand one thing: power. If you want to take him down, you need to find his weakness. I don't know if he has one. Everyone has a weakness, Claire, especially men like Richard. They build their empires on secrets, and secrets can be uncovered. She leaned forward. Do you have access to the company's financial records? Yes. I've been overseeing them for years. Then start digging. Look for irregularities, discrepancies, anything that doesn't add up. Men like your father don't get rich by playing by the rules. I hesitated. I don't want to do anything illegal. She smiled. A cold, calculating smile. Who said anything about illegal? You're not going to break the law. You're going to expose what he's already done. The next week, I began my investigation. It was easier than I'd expected. My father was many things, but careful wasn't one of them. He trusted me with the company's finances because I'd never given him a reason to doubt my loyalty. He never imagined that I'd turn that access against him. I found the first discrepancy within days. It was in the accounts receivable ledger, a series of payments from a company called RH Holdings that didn't correspond to any legitimate invoice. The payments were substantial, totaling nearly $300,000 over the past 3 years. I traced them back through the system and discovered that RH Holdings was a shell company owned by my father. I called Margaret. I found something. What? RH Holdings. It's a shell company. My father's been funneling money from Hartwell Industries into it for years. There was a pause. Can you prove it? I can. The records are all here. Wire transfers, fake invoices, everything. Good. Keep digging, but don't do anything yet. We need to build a case. The second discovery was bigger. It came from a file I'd found in my father's office, hidden in a drawer I'd never opened. It was a copy of my mother's will, the will she'd signed 6 months before she died. I read it with shaking hands. She'd left everything to my father and me, split evenly. But there was a clause I'd never known about, a trust fund, established in my name, containing 25% of Hartwell Industries shares. The shares were supposed to be transferred to me when I turned 30. I was 38. The transfer had never happened. I called Margaret again. I found something else. My mother left me shares in the company, 25%. What? Are you sure? I'm holding the will in my hands. It says the shares were to be transferred to me at 30. My father never told me. That's... She paused, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. Claire, do you know what this means? If those shares exist, and they were never transferred, your father has been illegally controlling them. You could have a legal claim to 1/4 of the company. More than that, if I can prove he hid them, he could be removed as CEO. Margaret laughed. Now you're thinking like a lawyer. But my father was not a fool. He noticed me digging. It started with small things. He'd walk into my office unannounced, his eyes scanning the documents on my desk. He'd ask questions that seemed casual but felt pointed. He'd hover, watching, waiting for me to slip up. Then the bigger signs appeared. My access to certain financial systems was restricted. My assistant was reassigned. My meetings with the independent directors were quietly canceled. Someone's been talking, Margaret said when I called her in a panic. Your father knows something's happening. What do I do? We move faster, but carefully, and we prepare for retaliation. She was right. The retaliation came within days. It started with my bank accounts. I tried to pay for Ethan's therapy session on a Monday morning, and my card was declined. I called the bank, assuming it was a mistake, and was told that my accounts had been frozen pending an investigation. An investigation? I repeated. Into what? I'm not at liberty to say, the bank manager said, but the order came from a high level. There's nothing I can do. I hung up and called Margaret. He's frozen my accounts. All of them? Everything. I can't access a single dollar. Margaret was silent for a moment. He's trying to starve you out, make you desperate. It's working. Don't panic. We have options. I'll help you set up a new account, separate from anything connected to Hartwell Industries, and I'll call my lawyer. This is illegal. He can't just freeze your personal accounts without cause. But the account freeze was just the beginning. A few days later, I received a letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of. It was a formal notice, informing me that my father was seeking to modify the custody arrangement for Ethan. He was claiming that I was unstable, that my recent behavior had been erratic, and that Ethan would be better off in a more structured environment. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. He was threatening to take my son. I called Margaret immediately. "He's going after Ethan." "What do you mean?" I read her the letter. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's a bluff," she said finally. "He has no legal standing to seek custody. Grandparents' rights are limited, and he's never been involved in Ethan's care. But he's trying to scare you. Don't let him." "How do I fight back?" "You stay calm, you document everything, and you don't give him the reaction he's looking for." The rumors started around the same time. I heard about them from a colleague, whispers that I was having a breakdown, that I'd been seen crying in the office, that my father was covering for me while I got help. The rumors were vague but persistent, and they began to spread through the company like poison. Then the anonymous posts started appearing online. On business forums, on social media, even in the comments section of local news articles. They called me unstable, vindictive, unfit to lead. They accused me of everything, from financial impropriety to neglect of my own child. I knew who was behind them, but proving it was another matter. "You need to stay focused," Margaret told me. "This is what he does. He's trying to distract you from the real work." She was right. But knowing that didn't make it easier. The lowest moment came when Mark showed up at my apartment. It was late, and I was sitting on the couch, staring at a pile of bills I couldn't pay. Ethan was asleep in his room, his noise-canceling headphones still on his ears. I'd been crying, though I couldn't remember when I'd started. Mark let himself in, he'd always had a key, and found me there. "Claire?" He sat down beside me, his expression worried. "What's going on?" "What do you think is going on? Dad is destroying me." "He's your father. He wouldn't." "He already is. He froze my accounts. He's threatening to take Ethan. He's spreading rumors that I'm crazy. What would you call that?" Mark was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know it was this bad." "Of course you didn't. You're his golden boy. You've never had to worry about any of this." He flinched. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You've coasted through life, Mark. Everything handed to you on a silver platter. You've never had to fight for anything." "I've fought," he said quietly. "Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Pain. The same pain I'd been carrying my entire life, reflected by me. "Dad was hard on me too," he continued. "Different, but hard. He expected perfection, and when I couldn't live up to it, he made me feel like nothing." "Then why are you defending him?" "Because he's our father. Because despite everything, I still want him to love me. Don't you?" The question hit me like a punch. He was right. Despite everything, I still wanted my father's love. I'd been fighting for it my entire life. "I don't know anymore," I whispered. Mark took my hand. "I don't know what to do, Claire. I want to help you, but I'm scared. He's all I have." "He's all any of us have," I said. "But that doesn't make him right." A week later, Mark called me. "Claire, I need to see you. It's important." He sounded different, shaken, maybe even angry. I agreed to meet him at a diner near his apartment. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "I found something," he said. "In Dad's office. Something you need to see." He pulled out his phone and showed me a document. It was a legal draft, not yet filed, but clearly prepared. It was a new will, disinheriting both of us. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. He's cutting us out? Both of us. He's leaving everything to a foundation he controls. Neither of us would get a cent. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something deeper. Something colder. "Where did you find this?" In his desk. He must have been drafting it after the Christmas party. He's planning to disown us both. I looked at my brother, and for the first time in our lives, I saw genuine rage in his eyes. "I'm done," he said. "I'm done protecting him. I'll help you, Claire. Whatever it takes." But the worst was still to come. 2 days before the board meeting, I came home to find a police car outside my apartment. My heart dropped. I ran up the stairs, fumbling with my keys, and burst through the door. Ethan was sitting on the couch, his eyes wide with fear. A social worker was kneeling in front of him, speaking in a low, soothing voice. 2 police officers stood by the door. "What's going on?" I demanded. "What are you doing in my home?" The social worker stood up, her expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm afraid we've received a report of child endangerment. We need to conduct an assessment." "Child endangerment? That's absurd. Who made this report?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but the allegations are serious. We'll need to speak with Ethan alone." I looked at my son, who was starting to rock back and forth, his hands flapping. "No, absolutely not. He's autistic. He doesn't handle strangers well. I need to be with him. I understand your concern, but protocol requires—" "Protocol? My father called you, didn't he? This is another one of his attacks. He's trying to take my son because I stood up to him." The social worker's expression flickered. "I can't comment on the source of the report, but we do need to complete our assessment." I fought to keep my voice steady. "Then assess him here, with me present. I'm not leaving him alone with strangers." The social worker hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But we'll need to interview him privately at some point." The assessment lasted 2 hours. I sat in the corner of the room, watching as the social worker tried to engage Ethan. He was overwhelmed, nearly nonverbal, and I could see the frustration building in the social worker's face. When she finally left, I collapsed on the floor beside Ethan and held him until he stopped shaking. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." That night, I called Margaret in tears. "He sent Child Protective Services to my house. He accused me of endangering my own son." Margaret's voice was sharp. "That's a serious escalation. He's trying to paint you as an unfit mother to undermine your position with the board." "What do I do?" "First, you document everything. The report, the social worker's name, the time she arrived. Second, you call your lawyer, not me, a family law specialist. And third, you remember that this is a tactic. He wants you to fall apart. Don't give him the satisfaction." I tried to listen, but the fear was overwhelming. What if they took Ethan? What if my father won? What if I lost everything? The next day, I received another visit from the social worker. This time, she was accompanied by a supervisor. They asked more questions, more invasive, more accusing. They wanted to know about my work hours, my finances, my mental health history. I answered every question, trying to stay calm, trying to prove that I was a good mother, but the fear was building, threatening to consume me. Then, on the day before the board meeting, the social worker called with her recommendation. She was recommending that Ethan be temporarily placed with a licensed foster family, pending further investigation. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "You can't do this," I said. "I'm his mother. He needs me." "I understand this is difficult," she said, her voice maddeningly calm. "But based on our assessment, we believe Ethan may be at risk in his current environment." At risk? From what? From love? From stability? From a mother who would die for him? "I'm sorry, Miss Hartwell. The recommendation has been submitted to the court. There will be a hearing next week." I hung up and threw the phone across the room. That night, I sat in Ethan's room, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, his breathing steady. He had no idea what was happening, no idea that the world was trying to tear him away from me. I thought about everything I'd done to get to this moment. The investigation, the evidence, the plan. All of it now seemed meaningless. What good was taking the company if I lost my son? Mark called at midnight. "Claire, I heard about the social worker. I'm so sorry." "I can't do this, Mark. I can't fight him anymore. He's too powerful." "Don't say that. We're so close. The board meeting is tomorrow. If we win, everything changes. Even if we win, he could still take Ethan. He could still destroy me. Mark was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Claire, do you trust me?" I hesitated. "I want to." "Then trust me now. I have a plan. Just get through tomorrow. Everything else will follow." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was too strong. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on December 29th. I arrived at the office early, my eyes red from lack of sleep, my hands shaking. I was carrying a folder full of documents, the evidence I'd spent weeks gathering. My father was already there, sitting at the head of the conference table. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who'd already won. "Claire," he said, as I walked in. "You look terrible. Rough night?" I ignored him and took my seat. Mark sat in the back, his expression unreadable. The meeting began. The usual formalities: minutes, reports, financial updates. My father chaired the meeting, his voice smooth and controlled. He acted like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't about to lose everything. Then it was my turn. I stood, my folder in my hands, and walked to the front of the room. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I began. "I'm here today to present evidence of serious misconduct by the CEO of this company, misconduct that threatens the financial stability of Hartwell Industries and violates the fiduciary duties owed to its shareholders." I opened the folder and began presenting the evidence. The shell company, the hidden shares, the fraudulent transfers. Each piece was documented, verified, and damning. But my father didn't flinch. He sat there, listening, a faint smile on his face. When I finished, the board chairman spoke. "These are serious allegations, Miss Hartwell. Do you have proof to substantiate them?" "I do. Documents, bank records, witness statements, all of it." The chairman turned to my father. "Mr. Hartwell, do you have a response?" My father stood, his expression calm. "I do. These allegations are false. My daughter is a troubled woman who's been struggling with mental health issues for years. She's angry, confused, and lashing out. The so-called evidence she's presented is either fabricated or taken out of context." He paused, looking around the room. "Furthermore, I have evidence of my own. Evidence that my daughter has been embezzling company funds to pay for her son's expensive therapies. Evidence that she's been using her position to enrich herself at the company's expense." I stared at him, stunned. "That's a lie." "Is it? I have documents too, Claire. Bank statements showing transfers from company accounts to your personal account." I felt the room spin. The board members were looking at me differently now, with suspicion, with doubt. "That's not true," I said. "I never took anything from the company." "Then explain the transfers," my father said, his voice cold. "Explain the payments from Hartwell Industries to your personal account." My mind raced. There had been transfers, legitimate ones, for business expenses, for reimbursements. But I could see how they might look, presented without context. "I can explain," I said. "Those were legitimate business expenses. I have documentation." "Documentation that you've had weeks to alter," my father interrupted. "Well, you were supposedly investigating me. You were actually covering your own tracks." The room erupted. Board members were talking over each other, demanding answers. My father stood there, smiling, as my carefully constructed case crumbled around me. I looked at Mark, desperate for support, but he was staring at the table, his face pale. "Mark," I said, Tell them what Dad has been doing." Mark looked up, his eyes full of something I couldn't read. I don't know what to say." The room went silent. All eyes were on Mark. "I don't know what to believe," he continued. "I know Claire has been under a lot of stress, and I know Dad has been difficult, but this is all so sudden. Maybe we should postpone the vote and investigate both claims." I felt the betrayal like a knife to the chest. He was waffling. After everything, he was choosing neutrality. The board chairman nodded. "Mr. Hartwell raises a valid point. We should not rush to judgment on either side. I propose we adjourn and reconvene, After a full investigation, I stood there, frozen, as the board members began to gather their things. My plan was falling apart. My father had won. I walked out of that boardroom, feeling like the ground had opened beneath my feet. My father had won. The board had adjourned without a vote. My evidence had been dismissed as fabricated, my accusations buried under counter-accusations. And Mark, my brother, my ally, the one person I thought I could count on, had sat there and let it happen. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I could see was my father's face, calm and confident, as he watched my world collapse. When I got home, Ethan was waiting for me. His school had sent him home early, another consequence of the CPS investigation, which had flagged me as a potential risk. The school was cooperating with the investigation, keeping Ethan under observation. "Mommy," he said, as I walked through the door. "You're home." I forced a smile. "Hi, baby. How was school?" He shrugged, his eyes darting away. "Loud." I sat down beside him, pulling him into my arms. He stiffened at first, he always did, but then relaxed into my embrace. "I love you," I whispered, "more than anything in the world." He didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I called Margaret. "It's over," I said. "Dad won. Tell me what happened." I told her. The board meeting, the counter-accusations, Mark's betrayal. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's bad," she said, "but it's not over. It feels over. The board thinks I'm a liar. The CPS is investigating me. My father has frozen my accounts and destroyed my reputation. What's left?" "Claire, listen to me. Your father made a mistake today. He overplayed his hand." "How?" "He accused you of embezzlement in front of the board. That means there's now an official record of his allegations. If we can prove those allegations are false, and we can, then he's the one who looks like a liar. How do we prove it?" "We find the truth. We trace every transfer, every payment, every transaction. We show that your father's accusations are fabricated. And we do it fast, before the board reconvenes." I felt a flicker of hope. "Do we have enough time?" "We'll make time. But we need help. We need someone who knows the company's finances inside and out." I thought about it. There was only one person who fit that description. "David," I said. "Ethan's father. He's not an accountant, but he's been through my finances 100 times during the divorce. He knows what's legitimate and what's not." Margaret was quiet. "Do you trust him?" "With my life. And with Ethan's." "Then call him." David arrived the next morning. He was calm, focused, exactly what I needed. We spent 3 days going through every transaction, every wire transfer, every payment my father had flagged as suspicious. One by one, we traced each one back to its source, documenting the legitimate business purpose behind every dollar. By the end of the 3rd day, we had a complete record. Every accusation my father had made was false. Every transfer was accounted for. Every payment was justified. "We have him," David said, his voice grim. "This is enough to prove he lied to the board." I called Margaret. "We have the evidence." "Good. Now we need to present it. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just walk into the next board meeting and hope for the best. We need allies." I knew who she meant. The independent directors. The ones who'd been skeptical but hadn't voted. The ones who might still be swayed. "I'll start making calls," I said. The calls were painful. 3 of the 4 independent directors refused to speak with me. The 4th, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who'd been on the board for 5 years, agreed to meet. We met at her office, a sleek suite downtown. She listened as I laid out the evidence, her expression unreadable. "You're asking me to believe that your father fabricated embezzlement charges against you," she said. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence," I said. "Every accusation he made is false. I have documentation to prove it." She leaned back in her chair. "I've known your father for years, Claire. He's a difficult man, arrogant. sometimes cruel, but he's never struck me as a liar. He's been lying to you for years. To all of you, the shell company, the hidden shares, the fraudulent transfers, it's all true. Then why didn't you bring this to us sooner? I did, at the board meeting, and he turned it around on me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'll review your evidence, but I'm not promising anything. That's all I'm asking. The CPS hearing was scheduled for January 2nd. It was held in a small courtroom, presided over by a family court judge. I sat at one table, my lawyer beside me. Across the room, the social worker sat with her supervisor, their expressions carefully neutral. My father wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His accusations were already in the record. The hearing lasted 2 hours. My lawyer presented evidence of my parenting, testimony from Ethan's teachers, his therapists, his doctors. He presented records showing that I'd never missed an appointment, never failed to provide for my son's needs, never done anything that could be construed as neglect. The social worker presented her report, which was damning in its vagueness. She cited concerns about the home environment and potential instability, but offered no concrete evidence of harm. The judge listened to both sides, then asked me to stand. Ms. Hartwell, he said, I've reviewed the evidence in this case. I've spoken with your son's teachers, his therapists, and his doctors, and I have to say, I'm troubled. I felt my heart sink. Your Honor, let me finish. I'm troubled because I see no evidence that your son is at risk. What I see is a mother who has dedicated her life to caring for a child with significant needs, a mother who has sacrificed her career, her marriage, her own well-being to ensure that her son has the best possible chance at a happy life. I felt tears streaming down my face. The recommendation for foster placement is denied, the judge continued. Ethan will remain with his mother, and I would strongly suggest that the agency reconsider its priorities before filing baseless reports in the future. The relief was overwhelming. I collapsed into my chair, sobbing. When I looked up, the social worker was staring at me. For a moment, I saw something in her eyes, not resentment, but something almost like shame. She knew. She knew my father had manipulated her. And she knew she'd almost taken my son away. The next day, Patricia Okonkwo called. I've reviewed your evidence, she said, and I've made some calls of my own. And I believe you, but I also believe that your father is too powerful to be taken down by a single board vote. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we call a special meeting of the board, present your evidence. And this time, we don't let him control the narrative. I felt a surge of hope. When? January 5th. That gives us 3 days to prepare. But Mark called me first. Claire, I need to explain. I almost hung up. What's there to explain? You abandoned me when I needed you most. I know, and I'm sorry, but I need you to listen. I didn't respond, but I didn't hang up either. That day, at the board meeting, when I didn't defend you, it was because I was scared. Dad had just shown me something, documents that made it look like you'd been stealing from the company. He said if I didn't stay quiet, he'd release them to the press. What documents? I don't know, fake ones probably, but at the time I believed him. I thought you'd done something wrong. And now? Now I know the truth. Claire, I found something that proves Dad's accusations are false. I felt my heart skip. What? It's a file, hidden in his office. It's the original documents he used to fabricate the embezzlement charges, bank statements that he altered, invoices that he forged. It's all there. Mark, if you have that file, then we can prove he lied, to the board, to the CPS, to everyone. I was crying again. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was scared, because I'm a coward, because I've spent my whole life being afraid of him. He paused. But I'm not afraid anymore. The special board meeting was held on January 5th. This time, I wasn't alone. Mark sat beside me. David sat behind me, a folder full of evidence in his hands. Patricia Okonkwo sat at the head of the table, having been elected interim chairwoman by the other independent directors. My father arrived late, looking confident. He didn't seem surprised by the meeting. He'd been expecting it, no doubt hoping to control it. But this time, he wasn't in control. The meeting began with Patricia speaking. "We're here today to review new evidence related to the allegations made at our previous meeting. Ms. Hartwell, would you like to begin?" I stood, my hands steady. "Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to present evidence that proves, beyond any doubt, that my father's accusations of embezzlement were fabricated." I opened my folder and began presenting the evidence. The legitimate business expenses, the forged documents, the altered bank statements. Each piece was documented, verified, and damning. Then Mark stood. "I have something to add," he said. "Something I should have shared at the last meeting." He presented the file he'd found, the original documents my father had used to fabricate the embezzlement charges. They showed, in meticulous detail, how my father had altered bank statements and forged invoices to make it look like I'd been stealing from the company. By the time Mark finished, the room was silent. My father's face was white. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "These documents are forgeries. She planted them. These documents were found in your office," Mark interrupted. "In your locked desk drawer, the one you thought no one else had a key to." My father stared at his son, the golden child who'd finally turned against him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's the truth," Mark said, "and because I'm tired of being your puppet." The vote was unanimous. Richard Hartwell was removed as CEO of Hartwell Industries, effective immediately. The board voted to appoint me as interim CEO, pending a full investigation. And the missing shares, my mother's legacy, were finally transferred to my name. By the stroke of midnight on January 6th, the company was mine. But that wasn't the victory I was celebrating. The next morning, I woke up to a text from David. "CPS case officially closed. Ethan is safe." I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. The investigation had been dropped, the file sealed, the accusation erased. My son was safe. My family, what was left of it, was whole. I went into Ethan's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He was still asleep, his face peaceful, his breathing steady. "I did it, baby," I whispered. "I protected us." He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" "Right here." He looked at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "Mommy happy?" I thought about the question. Was I happy? After everything that had happened, after all the pain and struggle, was I finally happy? "Yes, baby," I said. "Mommy's happy." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that could light up a room. "Good," he said. "Mommy deserve happy." I held him close, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I knew I'd won. Not because I'd taken the company, not because I'd defeated my father, but because I'd built a life worth living, surrounded by people who loved me and whom I loved in return. The months that followed were a slow, painful healing. My father didn't go quietly. He filed lawsuits, launched attacks, tried to undermine my leadership. But the evidence against him was too strong, and his allies abandoned him one by one. Eventually, he retreated to a small house in the country, alone. We didn't speak for months, and when we finally did, it was at a distance. A phone call here, a text message there, never quite bridging the gap. But there was something different in his voice, something softer, something that might, someday, become the beginning of reconciliation. Mark grew into his role at the company. He'd started at the bottom, as I'd insisted, and he'd worked his way up. He was now managing a division, and he was good at it. For the first time in his life, he was earning his place. And Ethan, my sweet, brave Ethan, continued to thrive. He'd started at a new school with a program for autistic children, and he was making friends. He was learning to navigate a world that often felt overwhelming, and he was doing it with courage and grace. One evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Mommy," he said, "I love you." It was the first time he'd ever said those words, the first time he'd ever expressed his feelings so directly. I couldn't speak. I just held him close, tears streaming down my face. "I love you too, baby," I whispered. More than anything in the world. The Christmas party that year was different. We held it at the office, not the mansion. It was smaller, warmer, more intimate. The employees were relaxed, the atmosphere festive. There was no string quartet, no champagne fountain, no display of wealth and power, just people celebrating a year of hard work and new beginnings. Ethan came with me. He was nervous, as always, but he handled it better than I'd expected. He wore his noise-canceling headphones and carried his fidget toy, and when the crowd got too loud, he retreated to a quiet corner with his tablet. Mark found us there, sitting together, watching the snow fall outside the window. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside us. "How are you two doing?" "Good," Ethan said, not looking up from his tablet. Mark smiled. "Good. I'm glad you're here." I looked at my brother, at the changes that had transformed him over the past year. He was thinner, more focused, more present. He'd grown up, finally, in ways I'd never expected. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything." He shrugged. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one." "We're family," I said. "That's what family does." Later that night, my father arrived. He'd been invited, of course. It was his company, after all, even if he no longer ran it. He walked in hesitantly, looking around at the transformed space, the casual atmosphere, the laughing employees. He found me by the window, Ethan at my side. "Claire," he said, this is wonderful." "It's different," I said, "but I think it's better." He nodded slowly. "It is. It's exactly what the company needed." He paused, then looked down at Ethan. "Hello, Ethan. How are you?" Ethan looked up from his tablet, his eyes meeting my father's for a brief moment. "Hi, Grandpa," he said softly. It was the first time he'd ever addressed my father directly. I felt my heart swell. My father's eyes glistened. "Hi, Ethan. I'm glad you're here." Ethan nodded and went back to his tablet, but the moment had passed between them. A small, tentative connection that felt like a beginning. The clock struck midnight, and the party wound down. I stood by the window, watching the fireworks light up the city. Ethan stood beside me, his hand in mine, his face tilted toward the sky. "Pretty," he said softly. "Yes," I agreed. "Very pretty." I thought about how far we'd come, from a Christmas party that had broken my heart to a Christmas party that had healed it, just a little. I thought about my father, who was still learning, still growing, still trying. I thought about Mark, who'd become the brother I'd always needed. I thought about Ethan, who'd taught me what real love looked like. I thought about my mother and the legacy she'd left behind. The shares she'd set aside for me, the trust she'd placed in me, the love she'd given me that had sustained me through the darkest times. And I thought about the word that had started it all, charity case. My father had used it as an insult, a weapon, a way to diminish my son. But he'd been wrong. Ethan wasn't a charity case. He was a gift, a reminder of what truly mattered, of what I was fighting for. I squeezed Ethan's hand. "I love you," I said. He didn't respond, but he leaned into me, and that was enough. The end. YouTube description. At Christmas dinner, my father introduced my 8-year-old autistic son to 40 guests as the charity case. He laughed. The guests laughed. And I stood there, watching my son rock back and forth, overwhelmed by a world that would never understand him. That night, I made a decision my father never thought his obedient daughter was capable of making. But my father fought back. He froze my accounts. He filed a false CPS report, claiming I was an unfit mother. He accused me of embezzlement in front of the board. He tried to destroy everything I loved. For a moment, he almost succeeded. Then the truth came out. The forged documents, the fabricated evidence, the lies that had held my family captive for decades. By New Year's, the company was mine. But the real victory was something else entirely. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have loved you most, this story is for you. Have you ever stood up to a toxic parent? Share your story in the comments below.